The story of Earthworm Jim starts in a similar spot as many gaming characters from the 1990s. Somebody wanted to imitate the success of Sonic the Hedgehog with their own brand of semi-edgy but still cartoony looking characters. But unlike Bubsy, Socket, Sparkster, and countless other Sonic-inspired mascot platform characters, Earthworm Jim would turn into a game that would very much do its own thing by mixing in some violence, crudeness, and the artistic genius of Doug TenNapel, Shiny Entertainment, who would later foster the creation of offbeat games like MDK and Wild 9, was looking for their first big hit in the early 90s and would eventually find it with Doug TenNapel's Earthworm Jim design. After purchasing the rights to the character from Doug, he would be tasked with largely creating the game, its levels, and would get the help of Shiny's resources in the form of a team of similarly creative artists and designers. And eventually the all-time classic of Earthworm Jim would be born. The combination of Shiny's artists and Doug's vision would prove to be a formidable one, with the game being an explosion of creativity and wild artistic energy from start to finish. Gamers and gaming news outlets alike were blown away with the quality of the designs and fresh take on the platforming genre. The Saturday morning cartoon style of the animations was a sight to behold at the time, as most games animated much stiffer in the 16-bit generation. In Earthworm Jim, the characters felt so alive and boisterous with their extremely emotive animations, and as such hold up much better today than many other games from the same era. The world of an earthworm that stumbled onto a super powerful spacesuit and thus inherited its abilities would go on to sell extremely well and put Shiny on the map for many years to come. Seeing as how the game was a collaboration between Shiny Entertainment and Playmates, a prominent toy company at the time, a toy line was also immediately in the works, as well as a cartoon TV series to help push the game and the toys. The style of the game lended itself nicely to a complementary TV show and toys, so needless to say, the entire franchise was a hit from the get-go. Earthworm Jim would go on to spawn several sequels, re-releases, cameos in later games, and many other iterations like the previously mentioned television show and toy lines. The wickedly absurd story of saving Princess What's-Her-Name from Queen Slug-for-a-Butt would live on in infamy well into present day, where most gamers with any experience at all in the 16-bit era know of and likely have a lot of love for the series. So what happened? With a series that took the 16-bit world by storm and penetrated so many other areas of 90s culture, how could it end up as the footnote in gaming history that it is? What the hell happened to Earthworm Jim? As you might expect, once the incredible sales and glowing reviews of the original game started pouring in, rumors of the inevitable sequel would begin to swirl, with the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis libraries both having their own versions of the original game. Gamers of all persuasions were eagerly awaiting the next trip into the wacky world of the dexterous Earthworm and his merry band of ridiculous enemies. They wouldn't have to wait long though, as the second game would launch the following year on the same consoles as the first, as well as several other systems like the Saturn, PlayStation, and Game Boy Advance later on. The game would be developed much like the original, which is to say it would be made with the Sega Genesis primarily in mind, and all other versions would be considered the ports. The second Earthworm Jim would also continue the same tone as the original. Its mix of wacky humor, absurdism, and sometimes gross out humor and some mild violence would play well with audiences yet again, with many hailing the game as an overall improvement over the original. Although, while future ports of the second game to 32-bit systems could easily be considered definitive versions of it, they weren't received quite as well due to their lack of enhancements and improvements. Odds are, if you picked up a copy of the game for those systems, you didn't mind that though, as the foundation of the game held up so well artistically and functionally, with the added bonus of cleaner audio that the CD-based systems provided. So, despite being perhaps a little behind the 8-ball in terms of improvements, the second game would see several successful launches across multiple platforms and generations, which is a feat not many franchises can say they've accomplished. This, however, is where the story of Earthworm Jim takes a turn turn for the worse and starts to lay bare the reasons for its current state of obscurity. As the 90s crept along, so did the prominence of three-dimensional polygons in games. While flat sprites and pixels would continue to have a presence as a novelty, it was hard to be taken seriously without investing into the idea of a 3D game. With this new direction of games would come lots and lots of games that would miss the mark and fall on the sword of innovation. While trying to continue to follow in the footsteps of platforming juggernauts Mario and Sonic, Earthworm Jim would take a stab at the 3D platforming genre. This wasn't before Shiny and their talented team would be allocated to work on other projects for the PlayStation though. MDK and Wild 9 would both turn out to be fantastic games due to that switch, but unfortunately that, combined with Doug TenNapel leaving Shiny to start his own company to make the Neverhood games, Earthworm Jim would be left out in the cold with nobody left to develop the next game. Interplay, Shiny's new owner at the time, did not want to wait for those artists to continue the Earthworm Jim series. A third game would need to get started while the series was still somewhat relevant. This rush to get another sequel out the door would lead to VIS Entertainment, a developer with almost nothing of note on their resume at the time, given complete control over the development of the game. This would turn out to be the single biggest mistake the series would ever see, as the third mainline game in the Earthworm Jim series would bomb hard in just about every aspect. It was later uncovered that Earthworm Jim 3D went through a hellish development cycle that saw major changes to the game occurring even very late into the game's development, so much so that the final game would contradict much of the marketing material and gameplay shown in advertisements, with missing levels and switched out characters. Supposedly, Doug TenNapel was involved at one point as a consultant, but was dismissed from the project for reasons unknown. What was eventually known, however, is that Doug hated the project and was later quoted saying that this is the game that ruined the entire series. The facts don't disagree with him either. Earthworm Jim 3D would sell and review horribly, with many citing its inability to conjure any sense of continuity with the past games or compete with similar games in the present. From there, the franchise would go on to follow a similar path that many franchises do once they release a clunker of a sequel. Put out some watered down sequels on handheld devices that nobody cared about, and milk the old games with re-releases on modern systems. A few false starts of a new game later, Earthworm Jim now finds itself in relative obscurity. If there was ever a perfect example of a fall from grace in the gaming world, look no further than the Earthworm Jim series. From the top of the mountain with two wildly successful games, 2 seasons of a fairly decent television cartoon show, and a successful line of toys that can still be found around today, it's hard to acknowledge the reality of today where Earthworm Jim is only fondly remembered to gamers who are in their 30s and 40s and still manage to keep in touch with their retro roots over the years. If the series has any chance of survival at this point, it's going to take a massive effort. Interestingly though, that effort may just be at hand. The upcoming Intellivision Amico is on the way, and out of all the retro-inspired revival consoles, it does appear to have the most going for it in terms of potential software and nailing its price point at about $200. The team behind the Amico have made no secret about working to put together a brand new Earthworm Jim game with the original creators from the original 2, including Doug TenNapel himself. Only time will tell how the game itself will turn out, but as gamers are understandably wary of both the Earthworm Jim franchise and the Intellivision Amico itself, the success of each one are inexorably tied to each other. If one of them fail to deliver, it will likely hurt the other. So here's hoping both the Intellivision and Earthworm Jim nailed their second shot at the revival they deserve. That's it for this video. If you enjoyed and would like to see more, feel free to hit that subscribe button and hit the notification bell to ensure you'll be notified when new videos go up.